A warmer friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Paul Fritschner. He does great work over at the Big East Digital Network, taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball. We'll put a little bit of a capper on the 2024-25 season, and I'll be asking him, how do we gauge this offseason? How has the college basketball landscape changed? It was a very top-heavy year with the top teams in all of college basketball. Is this a one-off year? Is this a sign of perhaps a little bit more of something to come as well? And what teams might be able to rise up / what conference might be able to rise up with the amount of money that they're putting into college basketball? And we'll also take a little bit of a look at Portal Madness as well. He is out there in the city of Cincinnati. He has been witness to everything that has been happening over at Xavier the last few weeks, so we're going to be chatting about that and so much more. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Tuesday. Now, unlike past off seasons, I won't announce every single time a guy gets into the transfer portal, and here's a very simple reason why. We right now have 2,007 players in the transfer portal. I literally probably would be able to make a shorter list of guys not in the transfer portal rather than guys that are in the transfer portal. So I will be certainly alerting you guys as these guys declare where they're going to be going next, what have you. And when guys do return, that's actually going to be bigger news than when guys leave, in my opinion. So I'm just assuming that pretty much everyone is in the transfer portal right now until further notice. And I do think that that's a way to be able to operate, and I'll flesh this out in a minute or so as well as what we're all going to be doing this offseason, keep you guys abreast of college basketball in general, because this is going to be a podcast in which is going to be staying going every single day here, all 365 days this year, regular season, off season, whether we've got 100 million billion games or if we've got zero like we do until November. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter / X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please just send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. As I was mentioning, we certainly do have a lot that's going down in college basketball right now. Just because games aren't being played does not mean that it is a time to be resting and everything like that. And obviously, you don't need to be spending like 10 hours a day every single day gauging college basketball. But I would say that if you're someone that's going to be looking to bet college basketball when the season gasses back up, you don't want to be completely asleep at the wheel, because we're going to be seeing a lot of movement here in the next few weeks. And we have noticed that the transfer portal is starting to have more and more moves early on. I know that there's been some rule changes in terms of perhaps the limitations in terms of how guys are going to get it paid, what have you, that are going to be taking hold here in the back half of the month. So I think that is very important to keep in mind. So you do want to be just taking note of some of these guys that are committing. Like we saw Pop Isaacs head on over to Houston on Tuesday. That was a very big move, and we've had a ton of them. And I do think that it's just so important, because when it comes to sports betting, and this isn't any sport, I'm not just talking about college basketball, but I actually think it might be more important in college basketball than any other sport, because when you think of all the favorite sports that you look at, football, basketball, what have you, we all make a lot of a big deal out of NFL free agency. We make a big deal out of the NBA. Like, how many weeks haven't you heard of people on radio and TV talking about Aaron Rodgers to the Pittsburgh Steelers? Like, that's one move. Right now in the transfer portal in college basketball, we have north of 2,000. Like, the teams that we saw this past season, they're going to look nothing the same. You might have a few teams that might have a few semblances of what we saw from a season ago, but you're going to notice that a team that has like 30% of their minutes returning from a season ago, that's going to be considered a lot of camaraderie from a season ago. So, I mean, that's just where we are in this day and age. You can love it, you can hate it, but you have to handicap it, and you have to do it without bias, and that's what I'm going to be looking to do. I'm going to try to be able to unearth as many edges as humanly possible for you guys throughout the offseason. I personally am not a futures player. I think that in this day and age in college basketball, it's really hard to be, because, like, what are you going to be able to get out of some of these teams? How are these teams going to be able to mesh? I mean, things can look very good on paper, but some of these guys could be flopperoonies, and we've already seen guys that at their previous stop, they were averaging like 3 points per contest become All-American candidates. So it's really wild what you see with the right fit being just so beneficial to a guy and the wrong fit just putting them straight down the toilet bowl. I do think that it's just very hard to be able to predict those sorts of things, and you do need to see a little bit of sample size for these teams. But throughout the offseason, I will be bringing on folks that they do dive into the futures market. They are going to be trying to get you guys some edges. Just because I don't provide it doesn't mean that this podcast should be bereft of it. So that is my overall theory, and that's the overall theory in terms of my overall shows as well, because you'll notice whenever I'm hosting on VSiN, I might not do like a lot of hockey or something like that. So because I don't do a lot of hockey, I pass it over to a hockey expert. Same thing goes for this podcast with me not doing a lot of features personally, because I don't do a ton of them. We're going to get guests on that they do, but we're going to have some general folks on to take a look at things. We'll get on some former players throughout the offseason, and throughout the offseason, you're going to get a preview podcast of every single conference. That's not going to be starting up until late May, early June. Typically, I do the low/mid majors first, and then the bigger teams after that, because I feel like with the moving parts that we do get in college basketball, it's easier to know what you're going to get out of those low/mid majors rather than the high major teams. I feel like things get a little bit more set in stone when it comes to these smaller conferences a bit earlier on. You sort of know what you're going to be able to get there. I also do think that when it comes to the offseason as well, things are going to be very interesting in terms of late moves as well, because you'll notice that whenever a coach leaves a particular spot, and this is a big thing with it, we saw it last season, whenever a coach leaves a spot, guys have 30 days to be able to enter into the transfer portal as well. So I think that that's going to be of intrigue. And what else is going to be is what we're going to be seeing in terms of guys committing early versus guys committing late, because I have been a big believer in camaraderie being so big with these teams, and we've already seen hundreds and hundreds of guys coming off the board, and we are going to see over the next few days a lot of guys coming to a lot of different schools. So buckle up for safety. Just because the season is not going on does not mean that there's nothing going on in college basketball. I am a firm believer in this because you've got 364 Division I teams, because you've got north of 2,000 players in the transfer portal. I cannot effectively handicap this sport without diving in on it all 365 days of the year. This podcast really does help me be able to do so. It puts me on notice that I need to be continuing to cover this every single day, relaying that information to you guys, because if I don't relay that information to you guys, I might not be getting it in general. So I do think that that is so important for me personally to be doing. This podcast is both for your benefit and it's for my own benefit as well. And whenever you guys have questions, please do call them out, whether that be today, whether that be tomorrow, whether that be a month from now, because quite frankly, we've got a lot of time. So there's no rush on this, and I do think that that's important to be gauging as well. I'm not going to have a way too early top 25 for you guys within the next 24 or so hours, just because there's so much movement that is happening right now in college basketball. This is more or less the hunting and gathering stages in terms of the offseason. You don't need to put out there any sort of scoldering hot takes or anything like that. I think that many of you guys that know my handicapping style, that just know me personally in terms of the way that I look at sports in general, you know that I'm not one of those people that's going to be overreacting, anything like that. We've got a lot of time to form our opinions of these teams. There's going to be no money loss on an individual game. You might lose money if you bet on a future and the entire team gets blown up or something like that. That could happen, but in terms of an individual game, there's no money to be lost until November, so why not take the full allotment of time and why not utilize it to the best of your abilities? I view this much like the way that you'd be able to view a college research paper. For those of you that were in college, some of you might have waited until the last minute, some of you might have done it at the first minute and then just let it go. I was always someone that if I was given 5 days to write up a 5-page paper, I would try to do a page a day, and I'm going to be doing the exact same with regards to this podcast. So hopefully that lets you in on how things are going to be operating here in the offseason. We're going to have great guests on. We're going to have a show for you every single day, and it starts off with our good friend Paul Fritschner of the Big East Digital Network. Next, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the East Family Podcast. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it's great to be joined by this man. It's Paul Fritschner. He's doing a tremendous job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. Did a great job all throughout the season over at places like the Big East Digital Network. He was doing the Sean Miller podcast. I'm pretty sure that's not going to be going to the great state of Texas, but Paul, he is based out there in the lovely city of Cincinnati, so hopefully we are going to be getting the Mr. Patino podcast instead. We'll be seeing on that. I know that Paul going to be hard at at work this offseason, taking a look at all that's going to be happening with Xavier and so much more. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Paul Fritschner. That last name is spelled Fritschner. And Paul, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Greg, it's always great to talk to you. It's a little bittersweet that the season's over, but still plenty to talk about for sure.
Oh, there is no question about it, because we are just getting started with regards to the offseason, with there being over 1,900 players in the transfer portal. As we know, there have been a lot of coaching moves, including one in your neck of the woods, because you were doing the Sean Miller podcast for Xavier this past season. And obviously, if the podcast returns, it's not going to be with Sean Miller, unless if you guys are moving out there to the great state of Texas. And just what have you made out of all that we have seen here in the offseason? Because even before the Nets were cut down in San Antonio on Monday, we had quantum shifts to the sport that are going to be having massive impacts for this upcoming season.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. If you look at what the sport of college basketball has undergone in the last 4 or 5 years, when you think about the transfer portal, you think about NIL and all of that, you're starting to see this shift, especially with coaches this year. You see Kevin Willard coming to the Big East to Villanova. You see Richard Pitino coming to Xavier. You're seeing these coaches make the jump to the Big East because they're hearing everything about what's happening with the house settlement and everything else in the portal and NIL, and how the Big East could be positioned better than some other conferences since they don't have to worry about spending money on football. Now, I'm curious to see when the dust settles, Greg, how that all actually looks, what that landscape looks like, what the money looks like, how it's going to be distributed, all of that, because you know that the SEC and the Big Ten, those big conferences are going to want to make sure that they don't get left at a back seat just because they have to worry about football. I think the way that you can look at a lot of these changes is just you have to adapt to them. And I understand that the sport has changed, but in general, the top end of the sport, you saw this weekend in the Final Four, the top end of the sport, night in and night out, is extremely competitive. It's very high level. There are a lot of experienced players in college basketball now because they're incentivized to stick around instead of going professional. Now, I think some of this will kind of even itself out if collectives go away, and if revenue sharing really becomes the name of the game, that it might even itself out here over the next couple of years, where this current offseason is the peak of it. But that's TBD. There's a lot that's TBD right now.
Yeah, there certainly is. And this NCAA tournament, it was known as the Chalky tournament. Like, I was posting up on social media, if this was a breakfast cereal, it'd be Count Chocula, putting in there the word chalk for Count Chocula instead of the word chocolate. But that said, just what did you make out of this past NCAA tournament? Because to your point, you talk about the competitiveness night in, night out, and I think that there's a lot of people that would disagree with how many favorites were able to hit in the NCAA tournament, but we notice a lot of those favorites being pushed to the brink. I mean, obviously, Florida very nearly doesn't make the Final Four in that game against Texas Tech. I feel like this NCAA tournament might have been a little bit more of a one-off. I don't know if we're going to see a team like NC State from 2 years ago make the Final Four consistently, but I feel like this year was a little bit of a just strange set of circumstances where you had 4 teams that were head and shoulders above the rest. I don't see that being the case moving forward.
Yeah, those 4 teams this year, Greg, were historically good. Yes. And now you've aged out of a lot of these COVID transfers and COVID players that don't have these extra years of eligibility. And again, I think there is going to be a balance going forward. Are there as many VCUs or George Masons in the future? Yeah, maybe not. Maybe you don't see those types of teams, Loyola Chicago. Maybe they don't make the Final Four anymore. But there's still going to be talent at the mid-major level that will win games in the NCAA tournament. All the magic is not lost just because of the transfer portal or NIL. It might just be fewer or farther between. I think this tournament this year, you look at Florida and their run to the title game, it wasn't just last night. I mean, it was against Texas Tech, even all the way back to the second round against UConn. Florida was challenged throughout this entire tournament after the first round, and they responded every single time they were challenged, and they did it again last night. You're down 12 with 16 and a half to play against one of the best teams defensively that we've seen in the last couple decades in Houston. Just a tough-minded, really challenging team on the defensive side of the floor who can rebound the basketball better than anybody else. Florida kind of beat them at their own game. I mean, you think about the way the game ended, Greg. 4 straight turnovers for Houston on their last 4 possessions. They didn't offensive rebound the ball all that well in the second half. I know the numbers necessary, if you're just looking at the counting stats, they did, but a lot of those offensive rebounds they got were kick out threes or long rebounds, things like that. I thought Florida in the second half brought the intensity and the toughness that they needed that we didn't see in the first half.
I'm right there with you, and such a good point there on Florida. Even in that game against UConn, they were pushed to the brink as well, and I do think that's going to be very interesting to see what we get this upcoming season in college basketball. It's Paul Fritschner, who does great work over at the Big East Digital Network and so much more. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I think that you bring up something interesting in terms of Big East, with them not having to deal with football, and how do you take a look at the sport with regards to power conferences as opposed to everyone else? Because I do think that that's a big issue that we currently do have in college basketball, and that's what was really missing in the NCAA tournament. Other than McNeese State knocking off Clemson and Drake being able to have their triumph as an 11 seed, we really didn't see a lot of the smaller teams being able to make those runs in the NCAA tournament. And is there a little bit of a fear that the Power 5, if you want to go as far as a Power 6 conferences, just really being able to swallow up the rest of college basketball just because they have deeper pockets than a lot of these mid-major schools?
Yeah, and if you think about McNeese and Drake, even those two games, Greg, you'd probably agree, they might have been upsets by seed line, but they were probably two of the most popular picks to win those games throughout the entire tournament, where I'm not sure anybody was surprised.
And UC San Diego was a very near miss.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you say, like looking at Ben McCollum, you're looking at Will Wade and those two guys winning games. I don't think anybody was all that surprised. So now you have to back up and you have to say to yourself, what does this landscape of college basketball look like over the next 3 or 4 years? And that's what I was saying a minute ago, where now you're going to start to see the money settle down. I think it won't obviously go away. You can't put the genie back in the bottle when you're talking about money and the millions of dollars and agencies and the transfer portal and everything else. You can't really put that back. But what you can do is you can start to maybe temper NIL to a point where you're actually doing deals for NIL at fair market value, putting them through a clearinghouse where if you're doing a social media post for a certain amount of money, you're actually going to have to do a commercial. You're going to have to be a spokesperson for a company or whatever it might be. There might be longer contracts where there's more continuity with the team. And I think that's where fans are really frustrated right now, especially at the lower levels, is it feels like the minor leagues that it didn't always feel like that, to where now you see these teams at the lower levels having to just fight for their spot, fight for what they can, so that when those guys eventually do transfer up, they're not completely left in the dust. I do think mid-majors are in a tougher spot than they ever have been. But I think even at the high major level, looking at the way the landscape is shifting and players having this freedom of movement to transfer everywhere else, there's no other sport in the world that allows the constant free agency and movement that college basketball is currently allowing. It's unsustainable. And I don't think it will last forever. I do think that there's going to have to be a point where, a player signs a contract for 2 years for an NIL deal. And if they want that money, they're going to have to stick at that school for 2 years. Because like I was just saying, fan frustration is built off the fact that college basketball is a sport where you could always follow a player for 4 years. You could watch them come in as an 18 or 19-year-old and develop for 4 years in your team's system. You could get to know them. And then they graduated 4 years later and potentially gave you a lasting memory in the NCAA tournament. You don't see that now because it's a 24 or a 25-year-old that's been in your program as a mercenary for a year or two, and it's just different. It's not the same. And I think that's going to slowly find its way back into the sport if you can start to find more contractual obligations for players for longer periods of time at a school.
Yeah, but even for example, Hunter Dickinson, who he spent his career at two schools, and at the very least, we got to know Hunter Dickinson because he was at Kansas for a few years, he was at Michigan for a few years. That was something that was good for the sport. Being able to have a guy like Drew Timme over at Gonzaga, that probably wouldn't have been possible without NIL. So I think that those are things that are very rock solid as well. And I do want to throw this out here as well, as we do have our good friend Paul Fritschner, does great work over at the Big East Digital Network and so much more, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I've been sort of wondering how these schools that are mid-majors are able to really be able to fight off and are going to be able to rise up. How much do you think that more of these mid-major schools should be looking at these Division II coaches rather than the retread, older heads that sometimes do get jobs? Because I take a look at the way that things are structured at like the junior college level. I'm a guy that was in my college years at the Division III level over at UW Oshkosh, where there are no scholarships, so have a lot of roster turnover there along with the D2 ranks. How much do you think that mid-majors should be trying to look at these guys that are at the junior college level and the Division II level, because these coaches have a lot of familiarity with roster turnover, which I think is so key in these schools being able to rise up in this day and age of college basketball?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think if you look all the way through, not just coaches, players too, that are having more and more success in JUCO and in D2. And that's why when you're talking about JUCO eligibility, potentially not counting against your Division I eligibility and these players having extra years available to them, that's huge. And I think that for the current state of college basketball, if you're looking as a mid-major school at potential openings and you're considering a JUCO or a D2 level, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And even, at the high major level, Rick Pitino talked about this when he took the St. John's job. He went over to Europe and coached in Greece while he was on his hiatus from the United States. And he talked about how that environment prepared him for the transfer portal, because over there in Europe, you start to see a lot of guys only have 1 or 2 year contracts. And it's much more year to year than it is over here in the United States with the NBA. And that prepared him for what he had to do for the transfer portal and the massive amounts of roster turnover. So I think all over the place, Greg, there are examples of coaches that maybe do deserve a chance, from these lower levels, from D2, from D3, from JUCO, that are really dominating at their level, that might deserve a call up because they know how to handle this landscape right now.
Yep, I think that that's going to be so important to look at, because we've seen a lot of coaching changes, and I think that there have been a lot of good ones that have been made. Like Ben McCollum is a guy that I was talking about. He was at the Division II level just 13 months ago. Now he's going to be the head coach over at Iowa. Your guy out there in Xavier, in Richard Pitino, obviously he gets to learn from Rick Pitino, so he gets all that wisdom over there. Did a great job over at New Mexico. And how do you take a look at this cycle that we've gotten? Because I do think that with regards to like a power program, like out there in the Big East and the Big Ten, you're probably not going to hire on a Division II guy, a junior college guy right away. You want to see them have a little bit of success at the mid-major level. But as these guys do get poached away from these mid-majors and they do rise up to the power conference level, I think that's an interesting game of musical chairs in terms of the few slots that are still open in terms of these coaching availabilities.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And you even look at with the national championship, Todd Golden was at San Francisco and then moves up to Florida 3 years ago. 3 years later, he wins a national championship. He embraced the analytics. He embraced what it means to win and to coach in the year 2025. And it paid off in perfect roster construction and a national championship. And now you see guys that are moving up into this high major level that are, I would say, it's a different atmosphere. And the other thing, too, you're starting to see more NBA assistants move into the college game, because these guys are now professionals, right? I mean, they're all being paid for their work to be on the court. They're getting NIL deals, everything else. They're getting paid. And I think it's a more attractive atmosphere with a GM at a college school now for an NBA assistant to even move down into the college ranks. I think all over the place. This is one of the more intriguing eras to me of college basketball in recent memory, because even back in the mid 2000s, when college basketball was undergoing the one and done era, which certainly rocked the sport, but it didn't rock the sport to the level of the NIL and the transfer portal era that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I think that that's such a great point that you do make, because a lot of people were just like, oh no, everyone is going to be bypassing college and everything like that. And I think that there were a lot of people as well that were thinking that players were just going to play overseas. We remember when Overtime Elite was trying to be able to rise up, and a lot of people thought that that was going to be the death nail for college basketball. And as we know, college basketball has been able to overcome all of that and so much more. But certainly we are in some changing times in terms of college basketball, and just how intriguing is it what we're going to be seeing this offseason? Because as I mentioned, we've already got hundreds and hundreds of guys that have already committed to these schools. I think that there have been a lot of programs that have realized trying to be able to get these guys in very early on And that is really the way to go in terms of college basketball because it's a very finite amount of time to be able to build up a roster and trying to be able to get these guys in even during like the spring/early summer months. I think is so important just knowing what you've got and trying to be able to build that chemistry right away for night number one.
This is going to be one of the most captivating off seasons in college basketball in recent memory because the way that money is being thrown around right now in NIL, players aging out from their COVID years and transfers trying to leverage value financially, potentially returning to their schools or maybe finding somewhere else. This, to me, Greg, sets up to be a fascinating few months around the sport, seeing what kind of numbers are thrown around from an NIL perspective, especially if the House settlement goes through and NIL collectives go away. If all of that happens, then you're going to start to see a lot of changes be made, I think. And if that happens, then these players are going to want to commit soon. They're going to want to have a spot, settle down, find a system that they like, and you'll see these teams really shift. And I think there's a lot on the table here over the next 6 months, and it'll be a lot of fun to follow.
Oh, it is going to be a lot of fun to follow, and do want to get a little bit of thoughts on your guys over there at Xavier, because I talked about it, the fact that Xavier hires on Richard Pitino. There's a lot of question marks as of right now, because I know that he's trying to get some of his guys over at New Mexico, guys like Donovan Dent and company, to be able to come over with them. How are things shaping up with regards to Xavier? Because they're going to be one of a few schools out there in the Big East that are going to be going through a coaching change. As we know, Villanova with Kevin Buller taking over, that's going to be very much a hot button topic out there in the Big East as well. How UConn tries to be able to get back to the mountaintop is something that is going to be looked at as well. But how do you foresee Xavier just trying to be able to play this offseason and trying to get in not just guys, but as I was talking about, guys relatively quickly, because guys are coming off the board in the transfer portal and in terms of just signing with teams much earlier than they have the past few off seasons?
Yeah, I think what you've already started to see from Xavier is the development piece to it. They're taking guys with multiple years of eligibility and hoping that they can keep them around in the program and develop them into Big East level players here over the next couple seasons. Richard Pitino and his staff have to build this essentially from the ground up. Roddy Anderson, who was the point guard at Boise State 2 years ago, he's the only player that is staying in Xavier's system from last year and the turnover, or this past season, I guess I should say, with Sean Miller going to Texas. Now, Lassina Traore, who was on Long Beach State, that team 2 years ago, he has the opportunity to come back. He put his name in the portal. We'll see if he decides to go elsewhere or if he returns to Xavier. But if Traore doesn't come back to Xavier, then Roddy Anderson, who redshirted this season, didn't even play a minute, will be the only player that's familiar with Xavier who will be on next year's team, but they will have zero returning minutes on next year's roster as far as scholarship players go. I'm sure some of the walk-ons may return, but scholarship players will return 0 minutes for Xavier next season. And from what Richard Pitino likes to do and what you've already seen him start to do in the portal, it's put together a team that has multiple years of eligibility, that can develop. And even if one or two of those guys transfer out, you're still going to see a lot of the core stick around. And they've gotten some commitments from some post players. I'll be interested to see what they do on the wings and, in the backcourt on the perimeter. But I think you can see the vision there. It'll be a much different team than anything Xavier's seen recently, especially defensively, abandoning the pack line that's been a staple of the Xavier program for the last 25 years. Defensively, it'll be a much different defensive system for Xavier fans to watch. I think it'll be a fun system to watch on both ends of the floor. And yeah, we'll see how it pans out, Greg.
It's going to be a very interesting offseason. Over 2,000 players have already hit the transfer portal. We just saw the Nets cut down less than 48 hours ago in college basketball, so that number is going to continue to expand, and there's going to be a lot of teams that, to your point, we're talking about Xavier returning pretty much 0 minutes from a season ago. It's going to be a lot of schools this offseason, so there's going to be a lot to parse through. I know that you, Paul, are going to do your best to be able to go through all of it. you're going to be very much on the front lines, taking a look at all that we get this offseason into what's going to be a tremendous 25-26 season. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said in the beginning, it's just my name, Paul Fritschner, on Twitter. And I also do a show called The Rebound Rundown. That's a daily show. I won't do it every day now that the season's over, but I'll have some periodic updates throughout the offseason. Have a YouTube channel for that as well. But that's the current project. And this season, we'll see, the upcoming season, we'll see what kind of media projects we do with Coach Pitino and Xavier. But I'm sure we'll hear about more down the line on that front. But for now, just my name on social media, and I appreciate you every time you have me on, Greg. I love talking to you.
Absolutely, and we love having Paul aboard because he truly loves this game of college basketball, does a tremendous job of taking a look at it at every single time he joins this podcast, lends such great insight. So big thanks to Paul for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, we did see a lot of signings out there in college basketball. The transfer portal, it is very hot and heavy, so let's give you a little bit of a roundup of what we've seen over the last 24 hours on the flip side. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It was great to be able to get Paul Fritschner on board. He's doing amazing work, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know that he, much like myself, covers this sport all 12 months out of the year. He's a very hard worker. He does such amazing work when it comes to everything out there in the lovely city of Cincinnati and so much more. And every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Paul for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast that I give you a recap of all the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Now, I will not be recapping so much of the rumors. Like, we've got a guy like a Dayton Albury, for example, who he was over at Utah State this past season. He didn't necessarily see a ton of minutes for them, and he's hearing rumors that this school, and that school are throwing out their offers. Like, I'm not going to be giving you guys any of that. I'm going to give you guys the guys that have actually signed with a particular team. And as of right now, like the walk-ons and stuff like that, we're not going to be doing as many recaps of those guys, just because, man, if I were to do every single one of these guys, we would get a never-ending podcast. But I said this is much more than like a walk-on, something like that. Jaden Quantins, he was over at Arizona State. Many people thought that he was going to be a guy that was going to be going into the NBA draft, and I still think that he's got time to declare. But that said, 6'9" freshman was really rock solid for Arizona State this past season. He had 2.5 blocks, 9.5 points per contest. As we know, the big kryptonite of Kentucky this past season was interior defense. He has decided that he's going to be going to Kentucky. This is a really nice pickup for them. No doubt about it. It's going to be a different looking backcourt than what we saw a season ago because, well, for one, they were dealing with a bunch of injuries, and two, some of these guys like Jackson Robinson and company, they're either out of eligibility or they are on their last legs or are probably going to be in the transfer portal. But this is a good way to start for Kentucky. They were a little bit rough down low when Mark Pope was able to have a bunch of success over at BYU. They did have guys like Fusani Traore and company in the backcourt, so I do think that that is going to be a good pickup for them. And then we're going to notice some boomerang transfers. Like, we are seeing this with Jamarcus Lawrence. He was over at Rhode Island this past season, began his career in Nebraska. When he was playing for Rhode Island this past season, was able to get much more playing time than he did at Nebraska. While he was with the Cornhuskers 2 seasons ago, he was averaging like 7 points per contest, relatively solid three-point shooter, but not as good as the 39% this past season with Rhode Island. Averaged 10 points, 2.5 assists per game. Welcome back, Potter. He's going to be with Nebraska. Nebraska got a little bit of a late jump in terms of being able to hit the transfer portal because they were partaking in the Crown event. So these teams that actually made their runs in like the NIT, Crown event, NCAA tournament, what have you, they're actually a little bit behind the 8 ball, which I find to be a little bit rough for them, but that's certainly something that you do want to be mindful of. Austin Nunes, he is going to be going to UTSA. Meet for the Roadrunners, a career 38% three-point shooter when he was over at Arizona State. Now, for Nunes, not necessarily a guy that was able to light the world on fire in terms of the overall scoring or anything like that, but I think that this could be a good pickup for a UTSA team that when they were able to have Jordan Ivy Curry a few seasons ago, they were good. They brought in Austin Clonch to be able to turn things around. This was a really nice three-point shooting team last season when they were relying upon Primo Spears to really be able to uplift them, but I do think that bringing in a sharpshooter like Austin Nunes, who is playing at the Power Conference level, that's going to be good for them. Mekhi Lowry, he is going to be going to UIC, the Flames, and Towson actually is going to be bringing back a lot of their pieces from his season ago, so that Towson, I actually think is going to be in relatively good shape. We'll see what they're going to be doing in the transfer portal, but that said, one of their main guys in Lowry, he is going to be heading on over to UIC, the Illinois Chicago Flames, 5.5 points, 5 rebounds per game, which actually led the team in terms of rebounds rebounding, but this was one of the best rebound rate teams in all of college basketball. Towson is going to be getting back their top 2 scorers, Tyler Tejada along with Dillian Williamson. These 2 guys combined for 31.5 points per contest, so despite the fact that Towson loses Lowry, this is going to be still a rock-solid team and bringing back a lot of pieces from a season ago. That said, for UIC, a team that was pretty solid on the glass last season, being able to get a guy like Lowry who played in a slow and controlled style, I think that that's going to be big for them. In my opinion, outside of Quantance, who I thought was the biggest transfer of the day from Tuesday, Pop Isaacs heading on over to Houston. This is massive because obviously with Houston, they had a lot of 5th-year, 6th-year guys that decided to transfer out of the program, and for Isaacs, he was having his season cut short last season. He played in only 8 games, and when he was at Creighton, I mean, he was rock solid. He was able to log about 16 points per contest, shot 38.5% from 3-point, career about 34.5% 3-point shooter. 2 seasons ago at Texas Tech, a little bit less than savory with regards to the 3-point shooting, but though he's dealt with a few injuries throughout his career, I think that this is a big pickup for Houston. I know that some are a little bit concerned about his defense, but when you do have a coach like Kelvin Sampson that just preaches defense, we have seen it with the way that Tennessee has brought in a few guys like a Chaz Lanier and company. It certainly can work out, and I do think that this is going to be a big-time move for Houston. Brandon Jennings has decided that he is going to be returning to VCU, and he is going to be playing for Phil Martelli Jr. over at VCU. And by the way, if you're looking for some good accounts to be able to follow in terms of these transfer moves, Portal Updates is a very good one. The Portal Report, they're doing some great work over there, and I'll try to get on the Portal Report guys throughout the offseason as well. Obviously, John Rothstein, Jeff Goodman, all of your just national analysts, Kevin Sweeney, John Fanta does a great job, so we want to give them a little bit of a shout out in case if you're looking to be able to track some of these as well. But you're going to be getting Brandon Jennings back for this VCU team. He averaged about 13 minutes per contest. He was more of a rotational piece, but just being able to get back any sort of camaraderie whatsoever, that's a good thing for VCU. So you do like to see that. We did see Caden Boom Boom Powell decide to enter in the transfer portal. Again, we're not going to be reporting upon too many guys that are entering into the transfer portal itself because I am just assuming that so many of these guys are going to be in the transfer portal and nothing else. But here's a surprise, a guy that is returning to school, Kevin Riley. He was over at the Blue Hens of Delaware last season. Delaware made it all the way to the CAA finals. For Riley, he was one of their sharpshooters, shot 36% from 3, 12.5 points, a little bit over an assist and a steal per contest. Delaware are going to need to work on that defense and a little bit of the rebounding, but that said, this is a Delaware squad that he picked up his own team late in the season. Martin Inglesby, he's a relatively rock-solid coach. They're most likely going to be without John Camden from a season ago. I'm pretty sure that he's out of eligibility, but all in all, I do think that that is going to be big for them, and then I think that this is a relatively good commitment as well, as you've got Brandon Noel heading on over to Ohio State. Now, we've seen the Wright State to Ohio State connection not work out because we remember a few seasons ago, Wright State had a really nice dynamic score in Tanner Holden head on over to Ohio State. He just saw no minutes whatsoever. I think that this can work out a little bit better for Brandon Noel because he's a 6'8", little bit of a versatile, do-it-all sort of player. 19 points, 7.5 rebounds per game this past season. Shot from 3-point range about 36% from distance. His defense needs a little bit of work, mainly because Wright State didn't play a lot of defense the last few seasons. But that said, I do think that this is a relatively good pickup for them. So I do think that that is going to be one we're taking note of. And as I said, with a lot of these guys entering the transfer portal, I'm not going to be relaying that because we are just seeing so many of these guys entering the transfer portal. That's not even funny. But this one I will report upon because Amar Ulyagard, he began his career over at Fresno State, was one of the top junior college transfers in all of college basketball for the class of 2024. He was at Fresno State, played 11 games, and then he decided to jump ship. Well, this was before the gambling scandal, and he decided that he was going to go to Western Illinois. He has re-entered the transfer portal. So he has played 11 games at the Division I level in college basketball, and now he's going to be on school number 3, and he's only played for one of them. He averaged 13.5 points per contest. Again, a guy that many people thought very highly of coming out last season, but that said, he's now going to be on school number 3 within the last 12 months, so a little bit less than savory there, and we shall see what the prospects of him are going to be moving forward. You've got Jerome Brewer Jr. is going to be heading on over to LaSalle. He was over at McNeese last season. He pretty much did not get out there on the floor as he was a highly touted junior college guy. He was over at East Texas A&M 2 seasons ago, 14 points, a block and a half per contest. He was able to put up some relatively good numbers over at East Texas A&M 2 seasons ago, and East Texas A&M, I think that he was there when they were D2 school, was able to make the jump with them to the Division I ranks, so he's going to be a little bit of a rim protector for a LaSalle team that now without Fran Dunphy in the fold, they are going to be looking to turn over a little bit of a new leaf, and you've got quite a few guys following their former coach, as we are seeing that with Russ Hodge over at West Virginia, Brandon Warrenton. He was really rock solid for North Texas. He was the American Conference 6th Man of the Year this past season, averaged 11.5 points per contest, shot well north of 40% from three-point range while giving the team a little bit over a block per contest. He's heading on over to West Virginia. You have to feel like there's going to be a few North Texas guys that are going to be following him, as you've got Jasper Floyd, who's currently in the transfer portal. Would not be surprised if he decides that he's going to be heading on over with Mr. Hoge to West Virginia as well, but that was a move that happened on Tuesday. You also saw David Hewitt. He was rock solid when he got minutes for Kansas. Kansas didn't give him a lot of opportunity after he 2 seasons ago absolutely tore it up over at Northern Illinois. He was one of the better overall scorers in all of college basketball, albeit it was for a smaller conference team, and let's call it what it is, a little bit of a smaller conference in general. But for Hewitt this last year, 5 points per contest. He was able to knock down about 8.5% of his threes. And when he was at Northern Illinois, when he averaged 20 points per game, he was only shooting about 34% from three. So he was relatively efficient there. Heads on over to a Maryland team that they had 5 guys and pretty much nothing else. So if absolutely nothing else, because you have to feel like Derek Queen, Julian Reese and company being out the fold, they're going to need to really rework their identity, that this is going to be something that'll be nice for them. You've got a big man that's going to be adding on over to Stonehill in Ravon Tudyk. He was averaging right around the neighborhood about 3 points, 2.5 rebounds per game, and for Stonehill, they've really been lacking a lot of size over the last few seasons, so that's going to be a relatively solid pickup for them. I think that this is a nice pickup as well. Justin Pippen. Yeah, you might remember that last name. He decided that he is going to be going to California, and he did not see a lot of minutes this past year. He was a former 4-star guy, a former top 200 recruit that averaged only about 1.5 points per contest, but this is going to be a Cal team that's going to be looking to turn over a little bit of a new leaf. They brought in Nolan Dorsey, a guy that was able to put up double figures over at Campbell this last year. Day-Day Ames, who's over at Virginia, he's going to be joining the fold as well. So already a nice transfer haul for this Cal team. So I do like what I'm seeing there. I do think that this is going to be a relatively solid pickup as well, as you've got Jonah Hinton going on over to Rhode Island. He's going to be hitting it hard, as last season he was averaging 8.5 points per contest over at St. Bonaventure, and I'm sure that Jonah Hinton is very, very happy to be heading away from St. Bonaventure, because he was a part of that St. Bonaventure team where they were playing 5 guys and absolutely nobody else, and that's going to be very intriguing to see this offseason, because with St. Bonaventure, they're losing so many of those guys from this past season, and man, they just need to be able to build a little bit of depth. And if they can build any sort of depth whatsoever, I do think that there's going to be a little bit of upside there, but that's a little bit of an issue to take note of. We've got a few guys declaring for the NBA draft as well. Abdou Thiero, he decided to do so. He was Arkansas' top scorer when he was out there on the court. Problem is for Thiero, he was missing for quite a bit of the second half of the season. Still was able to give the team darn near 15 plus points per contest, 6 plus rebounds, was able to work on his range this past season. So I think that he's going to be someone that is going to be highly thought of. I believe that he's going to be maintaining his eligibility as well. Most of these guys are going to be maintaining their eligibility. We're going to see a lot more NBA draft decisions as well. Like I was talking about Jaden Quantins and the fact that he headed on over to Kentucky. But, this guy is a projected top 10 pick as well. So you do want to be taking note. A lot of these guys that are going to declare for the NBA draft, they're also going to be putting their name into the transfer portal as well. And these are the sorts of updates that you're going to be getting on this podcast. I'm going to be parsing through, taking a look at where all these guys are heading. If I tried to do a entire read off of every single guy in the transfer portal right now, you'd be getting about a 5-hour podcast, because like I said, north of 2,000 guys in the transfer portal. I'll be doing everything humanly possible to keep you guys up on all of this. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Go Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, and we're going to have on a lot of fun guests throughout the offseason as well. Big thanks to the first one of this offseason, Paul Fritschner, for joining me last segment, and I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.